Hi there, everyone. This is going to be my attempt to put together uh, some sort of economic tutorial for Grand Tacticians, the Civil War. A lot of questions out there since the game went to version 1.0. Those questions are from new players, but they're also from those of us who have played it for a while and who've played it quite a bit from a while. We have questions, and I have a lot of questions. And so that should tell you right now that I do not have all the answers. I don't have access to any information that any of you can get. There's no sort of special insider scoop. I have nothing like that. I'm not particularly good at the game. I don't think that I purport to be particularly good, but I have put a lot of time into it. I'm interested in the game. I'm interested in the underlying economy because it does affect things in the game. And this is not meant to be a very deep dive into the economy. It's meant to be kind of about the basics of it. And before I go any further, I'll mention that I'm going to post in the description links to the manual that Grand Tactician put out. There's the fandom wiki, which is the other tab. You can see right now I'm on the manual. And I'm also going to post a transcript or an outline of what I'm going to cover here. For those who don't find my voice melodious, maybe a bit more monotone or monotonous, that's okay. You don't have to listen to recording. You can go ahead and read it and take it in chunks. That might be another way to do it. So that's the housekeeping stuff. And with that out of the way, I'll just let you know that this tutorial is going to proceed in three parts. So the first is why you need to care about the economy, even if you don't want to and you'd prefer to ignore it. It's going to affect you. And so how much attention you pay to it is entirely up to you within the parameters of the game. Second thing, talk about are a number of the specifics you got to watch for: credit rating, debt, deficit, spending, revenues, and I'll do a brief overview of the subsidies and what I think might make sense with the subsidies depending on where you are. And then I'll wrap it up by trying to give you some proactive advice, because one of the things that newcomers and others ask when they come to the campaign is, all right, so what? What can I do to make things better? So I'm not going to not give you those things. I will talk about those at the end. I'm doing this with the Spring 61 campaign in mind. I've played the CSA one a lot more because I think it's the greater challenge, and as I've said here and others have said elsewhere, sometimes we have to find the challenge for ourselves. But I don't think anything in here, not too much in here, is specific to the CSA, but it seems like it's the more challenging of the two campaigns. So that's where I'm coming at for this, and I'm just going to go ahead and get into it. So I guess as good a place as any to get started would be at the beginning. And you got to remember that the economy is part of this game, and what are you working towards? Your win condition in this game, in its current state, there really is only one. It is to drive the enemy's national morale below 25. If you do that, you've won. To get there, you have two exchangeable resources, which include your military forces and your economic resources. Both of those resource pools, your military and your economic resources, will present you with short-term versus long-term trade-offs. So if you take too much of it now, you're not going to have it there later when you need it. In my experience, consistently winning on the battlefield is how you achieve your win condition. This video is focused more on the short-term versus long-term economic dilemmas that the game subtly presents to you. And I understand it if you come to this and, it's supposed to be a Civil War game, war. Why do I have to care at all about the economy? Short answer is because the developers are going to make you. A little bit more concretely, the economy sets the upper limit on your military potential that you appear to care so much about. In broad terms, because this game is potentially very complicated, everything kind of has to be in broad terms. It sets this upper limit on your military potential in two ways. The first is that the overall size of the economy presents a potential tax base the government can use to pay for all the war-related endeavors. Second, the economy provides the implements of war directly. Tons of stuff: uniforms, food, locomotives, small arms, artillery, ships, ammunition, horses, gunpowder. And remember, if your economy cannot provide you with those things, you're going to have to import them, in which case we're back to the first issue, which is that there needs to be enough economic activity that the government can tax it, collect the money for it, and purchase it from foreign countries in order to pay for what you need to do or what you want to do with respect to the military. I would say even more specifically than just saying it's the economy, stupid, although it is, it's your credit rating that is going to put some hard stops into your military buildup. And you probably know it. My guess is if you found this video, you've heard about this or you've experienced it and you kind of want to know what went wrong. But when your credit rating drops below a certain point, and I think it tells us in-game it's B or something like that. I think we can actually find out. Is it here? Yeah, so you see in the explanation when you hover over, our current rating is poor. If we go below a B, though, we're at double B+. Congress won't allow further recruitment of troops. I can tell you can't purchase weapons, and you cannot build up your Navy. So that's what happens when your credit rating drops too low. This hasn't happened to me particularly often, and I'll just try to give everybody some sort of bookmark where we are. This is in version 1.0. Now, I've been playing on the dev patch for, it seems like, probably almost 3 weeks. But the game went out to everyone, I think about a week or 2 ago. I don't know. So it's out there. It's version 1.0. It's the same thing everyone else has. It's only happened to me in more than 350 hours, most all of it in campaign. It's happened to me maybe 2 or 3 times where I've gone to upgrade weapons or recruit a brigade. It's usually upgrading weapons out. And the ability to construct it will just be grayed out. You won't be able to do it because the money's not there. It would be great if I knew how the game calculated the credit rating. So you can see down here, this tells you what your current credit rating is. And it gives us a bit of an explanation. The higher the debt and the lower the budget surplus, the worse the rating will be. So this is a kind of debt to deficit ratio. Better ratings lead to lower interest. Yeah, we get all that. But what is your projected deficit? If it's a high debt and the deficit is projected to grow greatly, all things being equal, you expect the credit rating to deteriorate. The third thing is the policies you have researched and potentially the acts you have enacted, depending on where things are. But you can see right here in this current campaign I wanted to show you guys a live campaign so that there's some history here you can look at. Actually, the 8.61 interest rate is not bad compared to what I have been playing. I mean, when you get to double digits, once you break into 10, I think 11%, Congress is about to slam the brakes on and tell you no more. So the fact that we're down at 8.5%, that's not too bad for us. National debt, though, is just huge. 325 million. So my guess would be looking at the deficit, right, the projected surplus of negative 153 million added to a debt of 325 million, right? This I'll talk about these parts and some of these other things later. This can change wildly, this surplus, especially when I just came out of a battle here, and told me I had a negative $350 million deficit. And so it's shrunk by more than half in a few days. So don't freak out if you see that. And then it tells you how much you have on hand. And you take out loans, I believe, in $25 million increments. All right, so back on track here. The game presents you, when it comes to the economy, the economy and the military kind of presents you with two balancing acts you got to perform simultaneously. The economic balancing act is you need in the short term to raise revenue so that you don't incur crazy amounts of debt. And I think we can actually get, well, it doesn't give us overall revenues. I guess well, actually, yeah, it'll show us total revenues here. I'd love to know why it was spiking when it did, and what I could do to keep that going. But you need to raise enough revenue in the short term to try to prevent kind of what's happening to my economy right now, which is just paying for the surplus. And I guess maybe this can't, yeah, we should be able to click on there. There we go. So this is, again, we just clicked on the surplus. It kind of tells us where the budget is overall. It's this bottom line here. And we've been negative for quite a while. Reason why you have any sort of deficit is because you are spending more than you're taking in. I would say in this game, that's okay to do early, and you should expect to be spending more than you take in. I won't say especially in the 61 spring campaign, because I don't have I don't have much experience in the others to compare it to, but certainly I can tell you in that one, it's always the case that at some point in 61, at least in the current version of the game, you end up just spending more than you're going to be able to take in. But you still want to raise some revenue. Back to the revenue tab, to try to cover those expenses so that you don't have to fund it all with debt. Otherwise, you're going to end up, this is the position I've been, right? Since, I guess, early August, it's just been constant debt. Whether that's enough, whether that's too much, that's a bit more subjective. But that's why you need to take in revenue. The challenge is that by doing that, you're taking money out of the economy that could be used to grow the economy over the long term. So back to our economic tab here. I mean, I cannot get over just how much the economy has allegedly boomed since, I don't know, about Thanksgiving of 61. I'm only a month later, and you can see that is just an astronomical rise straight up. I mean, the economy is basically tripled. That's what it looks like, at least. I don't know. But if you tax too much, you're not going to get the long-term economic growth rate. And I mentioned earlier why you need a large economy, either to give you a large tax base in the end, or because you need it to produce the things that you need to fight a war. The other trade-off that is not the subject of this video, but it's related to the economic trade-off of short-term, how do I keep the debt manageable and also allow the economy to grow long-term, is the military dilemma, which is that you need to have at the beginning, the AI will build up. Like if you've done the campaign, or even if you don't, the AI in the spring, summer, and into the fall of 61 will undertake a massive buildup. And sometimes no matter how fast you try to build up your numbers, the AI will be ahead of you. But eventually they will stop, because they will also run into some of the challenges you do. And I'll put the Union back on here just for a side-by-side. Let me see if I can show you this. This is not recruitment numbers, but we can see what the Union did with respect to Army. Okay, so this is Army upkeep. We can see that it jumps for them in July and August of 61. It jumps again. I also wonder how their recruitment. So they have somehow, I got to look into this, spent far less on recruitment than I have. And this is actually something I need to investigate more. Uh, I'll do another video kind of how I approach this militarily, but maybe my idea of the kind of slow dribble of new troops to the front lines may actually end up exacerbating my expenses and might balloon costs. Maybe the AI has the right idea to just recruit them in big numbers early on. But anyways, uh, the AI is going to push you, and so you need to get enough forces under arms early. We'll bring us back to Army upkeep, because this compared, I mean, you got to take a look at these numbers, not necessarily on my screen, but on yours. I mean, Army upkeep here, these numbers are ranging from 150 to 350 plus $1 million, right? Compared to recruitment, which the bottom line down here, where kind of the low end of the Union recruitment is just under 7 million. My high end is under 30 million all the way up here, but it seems to mostly be, I don't know, around the 17 million mark, and there seems to be around the 8 million mark. Army upkeep is, as you can see from this left-hand column, get your M's and K's straight, right? Because Army upkeep is just by far the largest cost. The interest costs are rising for me. So you're going to have to match that challenge. If not, you could potentially be overrun with sheer force of numbers. If you want a rule of thumb, I would say as long as you have half the troops that the AI does, so you're looking at a 2-to-1 advantage, keep your armies, your field armies close to one another. Sometimes you can compensate for the numerical disadvantage by moving towards arty, and again, I'll talk tactics at another time. But you definitely can make it being at a 2-to-1 disadvantage with respect to manpower. I'll mention that in this current campaign, perhaps part of the there's other things going on here, but I've now exceeded them. But I actually stopped my military buildup very early in the summer, and what's happened is there's been a long-term trickle of recruits coming into the Army after that, and I think the issues for the Union is that they're just not getting more volunteers to replace who they've lost. You run into this in the game, you got to have enough, but if you have too large a military, as I probably do here, and this is only December, right? We haven't even gone to January 1st, 1862. You can actually wreck the economy by having too large, too expensive a military. I'll just caution this before we move on to the second phase of the tutorial, the parts. I would say in the current version 1.0 of this game, the trade-offs, the dilemmas, the short-term economic versus the long-term economic, and the short-term military versus the long-term military, they're actually not that big of a deal because the campaigns themselves tend not to go very long because the AI is not particularly good in battle. And so if you're trying to play optimally on your side, the campaigns are frequently over within 12 months, which is not long-term. Here, I've actually been for the last few months trying to slow play it. Like since winter hit around November, I've done almost nothing aggressive whatsoever. I've just trying to hold my territory, and it's been 2 or 3 big Union attacks that have failed miserably that have kept the fight going. But this is on plus 50 morale, very hard setting, and these are still the kind of results we're getting. But I would say start thinking like this for if and when the devs get the battle AI, maybe also some of the strategy AI, a little bit more rigorous. That might present you with thinking about, well, how do I survive in the short term, but also have enough around if this becomes a long-term grind. But I just want you to be aware of that. If you're playing it, this week and maybe even this month, I mean, who knows what's going to happen. The dilemmas are not particularly compelling because things end so quickly. All right, but back to the topic at hand here, which is really, it comes down to credit rating. I guess just remind us where we are and how it's changed over time. Credit rating, which itself is a product largely of the balance of spending, which are your expenses over here in the bottom left-hand corner, and what you take in your revenues just above that. Uh, on expenses, okay, particularly in the early game in the 1861, some of this you can affect as the player, and other parts are largely out of your control, and so you need to recognize what is in your control and what isn't. Administration is more or less out of your control. Again, things, all these things you can kind of affect at the margins. All right, subsidies you actually have quite a bit of control over. Actually, you have just about total control unless you're auto managing your finances. Interest costs you really can't control except to the degree that you can balance revenue and expenses. But the interest costs are just affected by the cost of your debt. The lower your credit rating, the more expensive it is, all things being equal, to borrow that $25 million each time. Army upkeep, again, so on this one, there's really not too much you can do, I don't think, except for deciding how many soldiers you want in the field. Navy upkeep, my recommendation is just don't even worry about it. I mean, the Navy and the whole kind of blockade, counter blockade, that sort of strategy makes sense in a long war attrition scenario that is probably harder to do, like trying to make the campaign last long, than it is to actually winning it. So I would say it's just going to be affected by how many ships you build, and don't build any ships. And recruitment, again, there's not much you can do about this one directly. Of course, if you have more soldiers, take a lot of casualties, fight a lot of battles, how you fight battles, it might affect how many volunteers and draftees you need to raise to refill your brigades. The weapons, beyond the minimum weapons that brigades and battalions and all the rest begin with, you do have a choice about that. And so giving them higher quality weapons usually means more expensive weapons. So indirectly, you can affect that. But I would say that a lot of this is out of your hands directly, and it's affected by other things. On revenue, that's also the case. We'll talk about revenue in just a second here. Before I turn to revenues, I do want to make a point about subsidies. And I'll click over to the subsidies in just a second. Well, I don't have to click over. They're over here on the right-hand panel side. But I would just say, look at the expenses I have, right? And then look at total subsidies. Right? It's 2.7 million. My total expenses are 190, basically 200 million. My total subsidies, by the way, most of these are maxed out or close to it, right? The exceptions here are recruitment, which I probably don't even need it that high, and politics. I don't have all the way up because I'm not, well, we'll talk about it in a second. But I've maxed out what I can do at this point, and it's certainly less than 2% of my overall costs. Why I would do this, why I would generally max out subsidies. Yeah, it's relatively cheap to do, but the other reason is that subsidies that are done earlier in a campaign have a longer period of time to compound their benefits to you. So just pointing to some of these here. Diplomacy. Well, diplomacy is not a great. Diplomacy is not bad, but we'll start with industry. Industry subsidies grow the heavy industries in your economy, which can later be taxed. Keep in mind also that industry is what provides you with a lot of the newer weapons, depending on how far you've advanced things. That was in a different video I did. But industry, I think, is probably the one. I mean, again, I would max out all of these, but this is one I would definitely make sure I have all the way up early, because you want those industries up and running to grow the tax base and to provide the weapons of war. It seems to make sense. Diplomacy, I used to be really hard on diplomacy, and as usual, I didn't really know what I was talking about, or thought that I did. But the more I read in the manual and focused on this in game, when you raise diplomacy subsidies, it's supposed to improve relations with foreign countries who then sell you stuff, including weapons, for less money than they otherwise would. So what this could mean, and I haven't sat down to do the math, don't need to, depending on how much you import from other countries, diplomacy subsidies may actually make you money, because you're only spending $250,000 a year. Look, for example, if we get out of this and let's see here, we just go to military, and I don't know, I pretend to raise some brigade from Georgia. Now, notice that the recruitment cost of one brigade is twice my total diplomatic subsidies. I don't actually want to do that. So I'll show you what I'm thinking of, but that would be $500,000 right there. If I go to this, I think of the Springfield musket, which is pretty terrible if you haven't heard my view on it. Now the Enfield's an import, as is the Lorenz, and they're both good guns. In order to equip this in, okay, so this is almost the size of that full Georgia brigade, about 3,000 men. That's going to cost me $293. $293,000 just to equip that Enfield rifle musket. The Springfield musket will go back into the armory. Again, I don't know, and I could have done it before and after. Like, this is how much we put in diplomacy, and after an amount of time, this is how much it drove down prices. But I think you can be able to see it only costs $250,000 for the subsidy to be maxed out with diplomacy 1, and you can raise it after that. But if you're going to buy a lot of imports, you might as well get lower prices for them. And so particularly early on, you might want to think about doing this route. Again, think about it. You don't have to go with it, but I'm putting it there for you. Transportation subsidies, or transport subsidies, I would certainly recommend maxing these out. It's an important, transportation is important in facilitating the trade and production in your territory, and it's also important for moving armies, say via railroad. Agricultural subsidies, they're supposed to boost farm production, which I would expect would mean that food prices would be lower, and you need to feed an army, and the government's going to pay for it. I've tried to do some research on food, but again, this is supposed to be a kind of brief intro video, and so I haven't actually measured the effect that would have. But there's a rationale there that agriculture subsidies may pay for themselves, or at least partially pay for themselves in the long run. And of course, by building out more farms, the number, and I think also maybe increasing the level, it's going to grow the tax base for the future. Plus, it also improves relations with European powers, which, as I just mentioned in diplomacy, is going to reduce the price of your imports. Another mistake I made was long neglecting the civil order subsidy, and it was to my disadvantage that I did so. And it's because I didn't really understand until the manual came out, and I had to go through it carefully and several times, that what civil order does, I don't know, did they give you the explanation here? All right, they don't give it to you here, but they do give it to you elsewhere, which is that high civil order slows the loss of state support. There are different things that can affect the loss of state support, but casualties in war is one of them. And depending on the level of state support, I'm not going to go through everything it can do, but it affects how fast policies are researched. It affects how many soldiers from a state are willing to come and fight. It affects the speed of supplies moving through that territory. Just as an example of some of the things that state support affects, at the beginning of the war, you're going to take casualties, right? It's the beginning of the war, and from here on out, there are going to be more casualties tomorrow than there were yesterday, because yesterday there was no war. So you want to try to minimize any sort of state support reduction because it affects so many other things. To me, $250,000 a year, or even higher, right, when we go to the other policies that enable you to subsidize it higher, it seems like such a steal. It'd be foolish not to do. And at some of the higher level economic policies, and I'll just give you the example rather than talking it through. I think at 3, it's the bank one. So look, you can get +2 credit rating and $120 million per year, but your support in states will decline by 3. The point I'm making is that if all along you've been subsidizing through the civil order subsidy, I'm making it up, but I'm guessing that you've probably held at least 1, 2, maybe 3 points of state support back. So for the low cost of, what is that, $250,000 a year, down the line, if you're willing to go through the funding route, which is a good idea if you're worried about the money, you're then going to get $120 million a year, and the loss of state support would be negated by the earlier investments in preserving state support through the civil order subsidy. So to me, you're stupid not to take it. I'd like to know exactly what I'm getting for it, but I'm going to suspect that it's something. And it seems like a steal if you know what else you can trade state support in for. $120 million a year is a big deal, I think. All right, the last 2 subsidies I'm not necessarily huge fans of. Even though I've maxed out trade war, I don't know whether this one pays for itself, but it might come close. Depends on the level of blockade your adversary imposes. Now, in my case, there are several blockades. When I had no trade war, those blockades were in the 50 to 60%. Now I'm spending $250,000 a year, and I've reduced their effect by 50%, maybe 33%, depending on what I invested. It seems like such a great bang for the buck. I don't know why you wouldn't go all in on that, even though I'm not trying to import all that much in this campaign. Imports happen because of the private sector production that is a large part of this. So I'd say go ahead and do it. Recruitment, at the very beginning of the campaign, I max it out. It's all the way to the right at 250,000 because I do want to have enough volunteers in reserve to build out my brigades as 1861 rolls on. You can see by the end of 1861, I've started to throttle this back. And what does this mean here? I did not see this before, but oh wow! So this used to be 50,000. And I've throttled it down, and the number of volunteers is at 80,000. And that's with 122,000 men in the field. So I would say that right now, that subsidy should come down even more. The manual says that there is a really strong lagged effect, though, with this. It seemed to indicate, based on the phrasing in the manual, that fully maxed out recruitment subsidies over the course of 2 years would double your volunteer pool. So I'm not sure, we're dealing with a lot smaller things, and that wasn't entirely clear whether it was just max 250K subsidies or whether that was, level 3, level 4, maybe $1 million a year in subsidies for 2 years. But there is an effect. When you don't need the troops, you can probably just go ahead and wipe most of that subsidy out. But it's not a lot of money, even if you kept it maxed out. So those are the subsidies. One other point I wanted to make on cost, and then I promise I am going to revenue, is the cost of debt and the cost of bad debt in particular. The interest rates themselves may not seem like a big deal, and if you've played the game, you notice that probably for the most part, it seems like your interest rates actually tend to be around 8.5%. I would say that's about my average. Sometimes it'll go as low as maybe 6, maybe 7%. Other times, again, particularly early on, 9-10% is not unusual. It may seem like a small spread. Who cares if it's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10%? Well, if you take out $50 million, so 2 loans, because I think they come in $25 million increments. So in the time it takes you to take out 2 loans, and you can see from my national debt here, right, that each one of these little steps up is a new loan. Right? That can come quite quickly. So for every $50 million, if you have a bad credit rating, your interest rate is going to be about 10%. So actually this shows us, this is actually really interesting. I like this. It shows us our historical interest rates. And you can see that they jumped over 10% here. Remember that a 10% interest rate on a $50 million loan means you're adding $5 million to your interest costs every 2 loans you got to take out. If you're able to get, I would say, I think they say that this credit rating is still bad, but to me, if you get the interest rate down to about 8%, when you take out $50 million worth of loans, it's $4 million a year. If you have fantastic credit and 6%, that's $3 million for every $50 million in debt you take on. Good. I'm not even done with 1861, and I'm up to $325 million. Imagine that, right? Imagine if all that debt had been at 10% interest. That would be $32.5 million in future interest costs. Whereas I really should have done this math before I got on here. But assume that it's just really fantastic and somehow you were able to get a 5%. I don't think I've ever seen interest rates down at 5%. But if it were, that would give us, what, $16.25 million? Right? It's a difference of $16.25 million in our interest costs. And you can see, because of my generally bad credit this year, I'm much closer to 32 than I am to 16. And that makes sense. So, while I and others are generally saying, the debt, it doesn't really take care of itself, but the interest rates, even if they seem like just a percentage point or two different, when you're dealing with lots and lots of debt, it can have big effects. And this debt is sticky because you have to pay it off going forward, and it becomes part of what you have to spend in the next year. All right, now I am on to revenue because I said I would. For the most part, according to the game manual, government revenues are equal to taxes collected. You can see up here that that's not exactly true, and actually in a pretty significant way. Yeah, in a very significant way. These are the taxes collected, right? Tariffs are taxes on imports. Sales tax, it tells you right there. That's what they are. Land sales are largely out of your hands, but I would say not entirely. And the explanation is right here, so you can read it. But I believe that if you subsidize your industry and your agriculture, basically make all the subsidies I said that you probably should, you can see from here they'll purchase land from the government to pay for creating new businesses or for upgrading existing ones. So yet again, I think I'm going to maintain that most of these policies in the long run should pay for themselves, or at least come pretty darn close to it, in addition to providing you, say, with the things you need to fight a war. So that's out of your control. But the tariffs and the sales taxes are within your control. Now, if you wanted to, you can adjust them. There is this slider. I leave them right where they are. I just haven't been that interested. I mean, in theory, if I reduce the tariffs, it would save. It would be. It should be cheaper to import weapons, I would think. And it's kind of odd that we impose tariffs on, say, weapons that the government then has to pay for, because you're effectively charging them more, but then you're going to be charged back when you have to buy them, or they're going to supply them. I don't know, but I just leave them here because I need some revenue. Right? Without these up, we would have even higher debts than we've already incurred, though maybe not that much higher. I did not do this campaign with an eye towards maximizing, like making it a model economic campaign, which is actually why I kind of want to present it to everybody. Like, this is what happens when you largely don't think about the economic stuff and you're focused almost entirely on the military stuff. It might be worth seeing what happens when you get rid of that. Anyways, that's how you would go about changing revenues. Later, as a result of some of these policies, so the Revenue Act, right? This would give you the option to move that slider to tax individuals through an income tax, and then the corporate. The corporate tax is one of the other ones. I don't know. I don't know if it was that one. Revenue Act 2. Well, that's the income tax can be raised. Okay, so then this, you have to get funding 3, and then you can just go ahead and tax corporations. You can see that will also hurt your support, and it'll take profits away from them. I don't know. I much rather have the Bank Act. Like, if I have to lose 3 support, I don't really want to be taking corporate profits because they're supposed to expand their business, which is going to sell more. It might also lead to economies of scale that might produce stuff cheaper. This one just seems so much better compared. I mean, you're going to get the boost in credit rating, but then you get the 120 million. I don't know. I mean, make your own choice there, but that's what I think about revenue. In short, there's not a whole lot you can do early on in the 61 campaign. There just aren't that many taxes that are there. You can choose to fully tax them or not. It's up to you. All right, I'm going to move on to the last part of this overview, which is to do a little bit of brass tacks. All right, so what? What am I supposed to do in campaign to try to get a positive economic result? All right, the first thing you can do, if you want to think a little bit more about the economy when you're getting your campaign underway, I am here on the fandom wiki page for Grand Tactician, the Civil War. Just take a look at the policies. Some are better than others. I'm not going to focus too much on right. There are a lot of good, a lot of bad. It's a different video. But industrialization, I think, is an important one, whether you're fighting as Union or CSA. The national morale, not a big deal. Plus 20% population, you definitely want that. Additional railroads, definitely want that. Higher starting level for heavy industries, definitely going to want that. And it enables you to get level 3 and 4 industrialization, which also means more subsidies for industry. I would say you definitely want that. What else? Union Pacific isn't a horrendous one. The +2 credit rating isn't bad. Plus 25% railroad transport capacity and construction speed. So yeah, none of those are bad. I'm whatever. You can read through them and you can figure out what you might want there. On the CSA side of things, the ones I would normally do would be, or do for this one, Apostles of Disunion, because in your home states you're going to have support very high. I've already mentioned I think support is really important metric. Southern industrialization, you can see that it's good but not great, and it'll help a little bit on some things. Again, the national morale hit's not the end of the world. There aren't quite. It doesn't appear like there's all that much or as much for Southern industrialization as there is for Northern. And even though maybe the Southern Pacific seems like it might be better, I think you gotta take arms agents. Not so much for this or for this, although those are fine too. But it gives you access to the Springfield rifled musket. And once you do industrialization 1, you'll be able to produce that domestically, and so it allows you to to kind of act as a stimulus for arms industries, domestic arms industries, by buying those Springfield rifled muskets. So those are the three. If you're really thinking about the economic side of things, I can recommend those. But you can also just take a look at the page. It explains all of the policies for both sides, or you can just take a look at it in game. All right, the next thing I'll talk about are the order of policies you might want to think about, or at least the policies you might want to think about going for in 1861. The manual says that if you max out the politics subsidy, it allows the researching of policies to go faster, right? There's a time limit, tells you in parentheses after how long it takes. It says that in the manual. I haven't seen that anywhere else. I know that state support, right? The higher it is, the faster things go. So going back to my earlier point, I would probably max out subsidies for politics and also for civil, for all of them. I mean, I've made the point. I'll move on. But think about which of these policies might make sense. If you want to start playing like you might play a longer game, I think Industry 1 and 2 certainly makes sense to do within the calendar year of 1861. And I'll frequently grab Industry 1 first. I believe during the pre-war period, I don't remember if Militia Act 1 is already done. I usually will have, I'm trying to think, once we go to war, it doesn't really matter, but grab either Militia Act 2, because that will give me, okay, so that gives me 2-year recruits. So the 1-year recruits, that's already pretty good. And what I found in other campaigns, as contracts expire for some units, they seem to roll over to whatever the contract is research at that time. If that holds in this campaign, that would mean that some of my units whose contracts are nearing an end, kind of initial end, that they would renew on 3-year contracts because I've gone up to Militia Act 3. But you probably want to make sure you have them on 1-year contracts. But I would say Industry 1 is where you're going to get some of your good weapons. Again, for 1861 weapons. So you're going to want that at some point. Small arms and artillery is pretty good there. Plus, it allows you to increase provide subsidies to industry. So that is an increase from 0 to $250,000. And I would say that by Industry 2, when that is researched, yeah, it lets you give $500,000 a year in subsidies to industry, which is fine by me. And that is kind of the point where most of the good weapons your side is going to be able to get is probably done by Industry 2, at least at the current stage of the game. Diplomacy 1 is usually within the first 3 or 4 acts or policies I'll research, because it gives you, and it tells you in the description is why you do it, is because it's one of the ways to get quality infantry small arms in relatively good quantities early in the game. If you took my advice and took arms agents, I would say rush through in Industry 1 as soon as you can. That will enable you to produce Springfield rifled muskets, and then you might want to think about supplementing it with Diplomacy 1 or Industry 2. Military 1's not bad as well. It's usually at about those times. I've gone through Industry 1 and 2, Diplomacy 1, maybe Diplomacy 2, Military 1, maybe this Militia X, that I'll then turn to government funding. I would not do this in retrospect unless I saw it's not bad, right? There's nothing that's bad to it, but in terms of the other pressing problems, we saw on my financial history, right, where the debt really takes off is right about here. And I think this is the point where I've subsidized industries, the buildup. I've probably recruited all the brigades and battalions I'm going to, and now men are just trickling into them. And so to that point, then I would probably recommend looking at government funding 1 and 2. Some of these policies aren't bad. You can see right now I'm doing the Tariff Act in game. I don't know that it's going to matter all that much. Let's see, when we go to tariffs, I mean, right now it's 20 million at a 30% tariff rate, but I don't think you can say, well, if we go up to 50, if we go add 20 percentage points to that, maybe we'll go up to like 28 million. I don't think it's like that, because it's going to make imports less appealing. You may actually end up importing less, and I'm wondering if actually the revenue collected from tariffs would decline. You can see that there are these points here. These might have been major arms purchases when I was upgrading the armies. I'm not sure if this was me, on an Enfield and Lorenz buying spree. But I don't know. Maybe. I think Finance 1 and Finance 2, they're going to give you the +2 credit rating. And again, just anything to give you a better interest rate on your debt. Tariff Act might be okay, maybe it isn't, but it's one that I'm doing here. I hesitate about these print notes. These seem like pretty big hits when you think about it. So the hit is that it decreases public wealth, I believe, one time by 10%. If I'm understanding that correctly, a 10% reduction in public wealth is a pretty serious recession, I'm pretty sure. And you're going to get 50 million a year for it. All right, maybe. I mean, it saves you taking out, what, 2 new loans of $25 million apiece each year. I guess that's something. Impressment, let's see what you can get. Number of recruits plus 10%, support -3, cost of supplies within CSA -20%. Yeah, the more I look at this and the more I look back to my finances and looking at Army upkeep, maybe it's worth it. At first I was like, I really don't want to see support drop, but if I'm going to max out subsidies on civil unrest, if I can do anything to make Army upkeep cheaper because it's such a massive expense, this one might be worth it. Revenue Act 1, it's kind of 5% tax and you lose 1 support. That seems like a pretty good trade. I'd be willing to do that. This I don't know if I like this. I don't think I like this one at all. War bonds, because all you're going to get is credit rating +2, but you get a wealth drop of 10%. Seems like a really heavy trade-off. You might have to wait until Chapter 3 opens. Did I look at this one? I suspect that maybe with tariffs, impressment, revenue, and then maybe minimizing your military buildup, it might be sustainable. But I guess if you're going to do this, if you do it early, you're going to get the 50 million each year. So, anyways, those are some of the policies you might want to think about. You can see that in this campaign, I've stuck with Military 1. We're right. It's Christmas, 1861. I'm not in a super rush to get this. It's going to take about 2 months to do anyways. And just another note, if you're new to the game, don't research more than one policy at a time. Because I believe it actually takes longer to get both done than it would be to just do them one at a time. Plus, doing them one at a time, the first one finishes and you immediately get the payoff. And so don't have multiple policies and or acts running at once. I would advise against it. So if those are the acts you're doing, you probably don't need what I've done. You probably don't need to go for 2-year contracts or 3-year contracts. 2-year contracts maybe, but there's a good chance the war is gonna be over, and you can see this coming. Like if the war's not going to end and you have a bunch of guys with 2 or 3 months left on their contracts, then you can research this. And you can make sure that you can, when they do re-up, that they re-up for a long period of time. And I would just say in the early game, I guess you don't have to do this. I'm not sure how much more food gets produced and how large a part of my army upkeep that is. I imagine it's pretty big, but I don't know. And so it's hard to get a handle on how important these are. But you can go up to level 2 at least if you want. But this might be something that, while I did in this campaign because I wasn't trying to play optimally with respect to the economy, it's one that you might never have to do, or you can just wait for 1862 to run that through. You don't have time for everything. We're talking about just kind of what are your first 6 or 9 months of policies and industry 1, 2, diplomacy 1, funding 1 and 2, military 1. Those are the main points I'd want to hit. All right, in the last few bits and pieces of advice I can give you. So in the campaign, one thing you can do to try to keep costs down is if you've let the AI stay above you in terms of overall numbers because you are concerned about expenses, keep your armies in positions where they can move relatively quickly to reinforce one another. So you don't have to have these big monster armies. I mean, I said in the other video I did on the Grand Tactician manual, one of the big takeaways I got from that is that the game incentivizes relatively small armies for lots of reasons that are covered in that video. But if they're close enough, if you have at least one cav unit, you can have the army, let's see, the army ability here, should have the army ability here to, down here, they already are scouting, but you click on that if they have a cav unit and give it the option to scout so you can see the enemy army coming. And you can call in nearby armies. You can call nearby armies to it. One of the tactics I'll sometimes do is if they get the jump on me, I'll pull the most endangered force back, and I'll bring it so that they're moving away from the enemy while the others are moving up to reinforce. You can move them all up the double quick too, and that way, on the actual battlefield, you may not be facing a numerical disadvantage, even if at the strategic level you are. The numbers on the battlefield might be relatively close, and if that's the case, you should have no problem winning, and if you do, then we'll have a different video for that. I would also say on the campaign map, some things you can do that might help. Build forts as speed bumps. So I've built a bunch, one here, one over here. It doesn't matter. You don't have to see all of them. I'm building one right here in central Kentucky. I put one in St. Louis after I took it because these delay the enemy's invasions. And so if I need to move an army to that, I got some time while it's sitting under siege to do it. I would also say one of the kind of ahistorical things, or somewhat ahistorical things, is that you can keep an eye on the other side's production in pretty great detail. So if we go ahead and throw, we can even just take ourselves out of the equation for a minute here, and we can see what the Union is producing. I don't know. We can just take a look at, oops, not none. No. We'll take a look at everything they're doing. and you can just get a lot of information about what the other side is doing. You already know from the finances panel that I was on earlier, you already have their entire economic history, and I guess maybe that's kind of showing what might be printed in newspapers and other things like that. But right, we can compare, say, unemployment rates or wealth or overall economic performance. It's also really odd that their economy is also absolutely booming at this time. I don't know if there's a rollover with end of the year stuff. That might be the case in preparation for 1862. But the point on the map is that when you're looking at production, if you can go through here and see any sort of bottlenecks they have in terms of resources, then you can use the rating ability if you have armies near where those are produced. So I'm looking for an example, and of course now that I'm looking for one, I'm not going to be able to find it. But if I knew what was, say, being okay, so say I knew that they were short of the stuff this place produces, and it produces livestock, wool, forage, other things. If we rated it, then that would hinder their ability to. It would exacerbate that problem they already have. And again, you would do it just by using your cavalry rather than having them scout. You would have them raid if the army is close enough to do that. But that would also increase their problems. You could also just go for an invasion, take over the cities nearby, control the important infrastructure points, build forts and that kind of stuff, and do it. Second to last suggestion is, let's see if we can do this right. All right. Know about your other sources. So this is the fandom page. There's quite a bit here. I think if you are just starting off, work through this and use Grand Tactician's manual. Yeah, it's long, but it's got a lot of information. It starts here on page 35, and I think I'll give you the page numbers in the description. There's a lot in here. Kind of ironically, the first thing they talk about is stuff I'm not talking about because it's not rendering in game right now. I don't know if it's because it's winter and it's those little arrows aren't showing up or what the problem is, but it didn't have to be in this video, which is supposed to be kind of basics. But if you want to know what the devs want you to know, then go ahead and read that. The last point I would make with respect to the economy is don't neglect your railroads. And so remember, on here you got the railroad tab. You can build railroads where you have all of the green. These are IIPs, important infrastructure points. And if you took the railway Southern or Northern Pacific Railway, you'll have advantages when building railroads. If you have transportation subsidies maxed out, I think they'll go faster. And if you build one at a time, they will go faster. So this is the first campaign where a railroad has been built relatively quickly. And the Jackson to Selma one was started, within last year, and it's almost completed. Now it only has 3 IIPs, but it's something. And I also started very recently the Covington and Nashville line. So this is I think it's a pretty big one, right? It runs all the way from almost Cincinnati up here. It's going to run down and it's going to terminate in Nashville. And because the Union seems to be hanging out a lot in Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, it seems like this is going to be an area of contention. I just got Kentucky somehow. I was just building a fort and Kentucky seceded. So the fact that, wait a minute, where am I here? I must have scrolled down. Oh, here it is. Okay, so it's up here. I was going to say it's not all the way done, but I started this a little while ago, and the fact is that 15% of it's done. While I also have been working on another railroad, I violated my, it's do what I say, not as I do. The fact that this is almost done, I think is fairly impressive. But it probably makes more sense, especially because the campaigns tend to be short, is to just get them done as one at a time as quickly as possible so you actually get to see it done and use it in campaign. The manual explains it, but I'll give you the kind of short version now. When a railroad connects those IIPs, each of those green dots, it dramatically increases the transport capacity of the area, which basically means goods and trade move much quicker. So supplies get to armies or get to depots, and then from depots to armies much quicker when there's a railroad that runs through the IIP. So I probably wouldn't advise, but I haven't dug deep enough to know that I would say never do it. I don't know that I would advise necessarily building them where there aren't conflicts, because I like the kind of double duty of moving resources, but also having railroads available to move troops. But that is my personal preference. So that's it. I'm going to wrap it here. I always fail at brevity, but it is what it is. Hopefully in an hour I've knocked out most of the questions people have. I know that as I'm going through this, I get even more questions. If you have any comments, corrections, suggestions, all that can go in the comment section below here. This video is very much a work in progress. I don't take any offense to corrections or anything like that. I think it's more important that we get the information right, to help out newcomers to the game to enjoy it, because I think it is a game that they should enjoy when they're able to get into it. And so if there's enough that needs to be corrected and do this over again, then I'll do it over again. But otherwise, we'll just leave any corrections in the comments. All right, if you made it to this point, thanks for watching, and hope to have you back here in the future.